For years, I covered their bills while my sister contributed nothing. The one time I asked for help, my parents scoffed. "We're not here to serve you." I quietly canceled every payment. 4 days later, they showed up at my door, in tears and begging. I, 34M, never thought silence could feel this heavy. Standing in my doorway, watching my parents crumble into tears on my porch, I felt absolutely nothing. For days. That's all it took for their world to come crashing down. 4 days without my money propping up their lifestyle, and suddenly I wasn't the ungrateful son anymore. I was their last hope. Let me back up. For the past 8 years, I've been the family's silent ATM. It started small, like these things always do. Dad's car needed repairs he couldn't afford. Mom's medication wasn't fully covered by insurance. My younger sister was struggling with student loans. I had a good job in software development, no wife, no kids, disposable income. So I helped. One payment became two. Two became five. Five became everything. Every month, like clockwork, I covered their mortgage payment, $1,700. Their car insurance, both vehicles, another $300. The utilities for their 4-bedroom house that only 2 people lived in, roughly $400 depending on the season. Dad's medication for his heart condition, $200 after insurance. Mom's physical therapy sessions, another $150. My sister's car payment because she insisted she needed a brand new SUV for $120. Her phone bill, her gym membership, her streaming services. Line after line after line of automatic payments draining from my account on the first of every month. I kept a spreadsheet, called it my financial hemorrhage tracker. Some months I was paying out over $4,000 to keep their lives comfortable. For 8 years, I did this without complaint. I lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment while they enjoyed their spacious house in a nice neighborhood. I drove a 7-year-old sedan while my sister posted Instagram stories from her new vehicle. I meal prepped chicken and rice while they sent me photos of restaurant dinners I was essentially funding. The thing that really got me wasn't the money itself. I could afford it, technically. I'd climbed the corporate ladder fast, made smart career moves, and my salary reflected that. What gutted me was the expectation, the entitlement. The way my sister would text me asking for more money for a vacation while I was eating 49-cent ramen for dinner because I was trying to rebuild my emergency fund. The way my parents never once asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, if this arrangement was sustainable for me. 3 months ago, everything changed. My company announced layoffs. My entire department was being restructured. I survived the first round, but the writing was on the wall. I needed to prepare for the worst. I needed to build up my savings, cut unnecessary expenses, create a safety net that could sustain me through a potential job search. For the first time in 8 years, I needed to think about my own financial security. I called a family dinner, made a whole presentation in my head about how to approach this delicately. I would explain the situation, ask them to take over just a few of their own bills, maybe give me 6 months to stabilize. I wasn't even asking them to pay me back for the years of support, just to stand on their own feet for a little while. Dad opened the door, already irritated that I'd asked them to skip their usual Friday night restaurant outing to talk. The house smelled like the expensive coffee Mom had started buying, the kind I'd seen on my credit card statement at $40 a bag. My sister was there too, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up when I walked in. I sat down at their dining room table and explained everything. The layoffs, the uncertainty, my need to reduce expenses temporarily. I laid out which bills I needed them to take back over. Just the mortgage, the car payments, and the utilities. I would still cover the medical expenses because I knew those were less flexible. I even offered to help them create a budget, showed them that Dad's pension and Mom's part-time bookkeeping job could cover these costs if they made some adjustments. My sister looked up from her phone long enough to laugh. Actually laughed. She told me I was being dramatic, that I wasn't actually going to lose my job, that I was just being cheap. Mom's face tightened in that way that meant she was about to say something cruel, but would phrase it as concern. She reminded me that they'd raised me, fed me, clothed me, and now that they needed help in their retirement years, I was abandoning them. But it was Dad's response that really shattered something in me. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and stared at me with pure disdain. He told me they weren't here to serve me. Said I was a grown man who should be able to handle his own finances without running to them for help. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I was asking them to handle their own finances, but somehow he'd twisted it into me being the dependent one. My sister chimed in again, suggesting I just get a second job if money was tight. She worked part-time retail by choice, roughly 15 hours a week, and lived entirely off my subsidies. But sure, I should get a second job on top of my 60-hour work weeks. I left that dinner in a daze, drove home in silence, sat in my apartment staring at my laptop screen for 3 hours. Then I opened my banking app and started canceling payments. Every single automatic transfer, every bill that had their names on it. Mortgage, car insurance, car payments, utilities, phone bills, subscriptions, everything. 8 years of financial support deleted in 45 minutes. I didn't tell them, didn't send a warning text, didn't give them a chance to prepare. They'd made it clear how they felt about my request for help. Now they could experience what no help actually looked like. The first call came on day 2. Mom, asking if there was a problem with my bank account because the mortgage payment hadn't gone through. I told her my bank account was fine and hung up. She called back immediately. I declined it. She called 6 more times. I blocked the number. Dad tried next. Left a voicemail saying there must be some kind of mistake, asking me to call him back to sort it out. I deleted it without responding. My sister sent a string of increasingly frantic texts asking why her car payment was declined. I muted the conversation. By day 3, my email was flooded with late payment notices forwarded from their accounts. They'd clearly realized this wasn't a technical error. My phone showed 43 missed calls from various combinations of my family members. I'd blocked all their numbers by then. The texts that came through from my sister's work phone were becoming desperate, then angry, then desperate again. She called me selfish, cruel, vindictive. Said I was destroying the family over nothing. Day 4 was a Saturday. I was meal prepping for the week, music playing, actually feeling peaceful for the first time in years, when someone started pounding on my door. Aggressive, desperate pounding. I looked through the peephole, and there they were. All 3 of them. My parents looked like they'd aged a decade in 4 days. My sister's eyes were swollen from crying. I almost didn't open it. My hand hovered over the deadbolt for a solid minute while they continued knocking. But curiosity won. I needed to see this. Needed to hear what they'd say now that the money had dried up. The moment I opened the door, Mom collapsed into dramatic sobs. She pushed past me into my apartment without invitation, wailing about how could I do this to them. They were going to lose everything. Didn't I care about my own parents? Dad looked defeated in a way I'd never seen. My sister just stared at me with pure hatred. Dad started talking first, once Mom's sobs reduced to hiccups. He explained they'd received foreclosure warnings, disconnection notices, calls from creditors. Their carefully maintained credit scores were tanking. My sister's car was being threatened with repossession. They'd been living paycheck to paycheck, he admitted, relying entirely on my contributions to maintain their lifestyle. Without my money, everything was falling apart instantly. I let him finish. Let the silence stretch out. Then I asked him if he remembered what he'd told me 4 days ago. About how they weren't here to serve me. About how I should handle my own finances. He looked at his shoes. My sister tried to interrupt with more accusations, but I cut her off. I asked her about that second job suggestion. Asked if she'd considered taking her own advice. Mom tried a different approach. Tears streaming, she reminded me of everything they'd sacrificed raising me. The birthday parties, the Christmas presents, the college tuition support. She made it sound like parenting was some kind of loan I was obligated to repay with interest. I let her talk herself out. Then I went to my desk and pulled out my laptop. Opened that spreadsheet I'd been maintaining. Showed them 8 years of payments. Totaled at the bottom in red, $347,000. Over $250,000 I'd given them without ever asking for recognition, appreciation, or repayment. I watched that number sink in. Watched my sister's face go pale. Watched Dad's hands start shaking. I told them I'd had 8 years to think about whether I was being a good son. For days to think about whether they'd been good parents. The math wasn't working out in their favor. My sister tried to argue that family was supposed to help each other. I agreed completely. Asked her when she was planning to start helping. She went silent. Dad tried the guilt angle. Reminded me they were getting older, that retirement was supposed to be their time to relax. I asked him if my 20s and 30s were supposed to be my time to be an unpaid retirement fund. Asked him what they would have done if I'd never existed to bankroll their lifestyle. He didn't have an answer. The conversation went in circles for an hour. Tears, anger, bargaining, more tears. They tried everything. Mom offered to pay me back, a laughable suggestion given that they couldn't even cover their basic bills. Dad promised they'd be more appreciative, as if gratitude was what I'd been missing. My sister actually apologized, though it was wrapped in so many justifications that it barely counted. I told them I needed time to think, that I'd spent 8 years not thinking, just giving, and now I needed to process everything. They begged me not to let them lose their house. I reminded them it wasn't my house. Never had been. I'd just been paying for them to live in it. They left eventually, when it became clear I wasn't going to restore the payments that night. More tears at the door. More promises to do better. I closed the door behind them and felt that heavy silence return. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since my parents showed up crying. I've had time to process everything, and the calls and messages haven't stopped. I've also learned some things that made this situation even worse than I thought. My sister let something slip during one of her angry text rants. She mentioned how unfair it was that I was punishing them when they'd already been planning to ask for more help. Apparently, my parents were looking at buying a vacation condo. A vacation condo. While I was paying their primary mortgage. While I was facing potential unemployment. They were browsing properties in Florida, planning to ask me to help with the down payment. I hired a financial advisor to look at their situation objectively. Showed him all my records, all their bills, everything. His assessment was brutal. They'd been living at least 40% above their actual means for years, entirely subsidized by me. But worse than that, they'd taken out credit cards and personal loans I didn't know about. Apparently, my money covered their essentials, which freed up their own income for luxuries and debt from previous luxuries. Dad's pension was $3,200 a month. Mom made about $1,500 with her part-time work. Together, they pulled in about $5,600 monthly. Their essential expenses, the ones I'd been covering, were about $3,000. That left them with $2,600 for food, gas, entertainment, and discretionary spending. That should have been manageable. But they'd financed furniture, taken expensive trips, and maintained a lifestyle that required my subsidies to sustain. My sister's situation was even more insulting. I did some digging through old texts and emails. She'd been working only part-time by choice for 3 years, turning down full-time positions because she didn't want to be tied down. She'd told me she couldn't find full-time work. That was a lie. She'd told our parents she was barely scraping by. Also a lie. She had money for concerts, shopping, weekend trips with friends. My $420 monthly car payment gift was just freeing up her part-time income for fun. I made a decision. I wrote out a formal proposal, printed it, put it in an envelope, called my parents and told them I'd meet them for coffee to discuss the path forward. My sister tried to invite herself, but I told her this was between me and our parents first. We met at a neutral location, a cafe halfway between our places. They looked terrible. Mom had clearly not been sleeping. Dad seemed smaller somehow, diminished. They started with more apologies before I'd even sat down. I let them finish, then slid the envelope across the table. Inside was my proposal. I would restore partial payments for 6 months only. I would cover half their mortgage and Dad's medications. That was it. Everything else was their responsibility. In exchange, they would sell their house and downsize to something they could actually afford on their income. They would provide me with monthly financial statements proving they were living within their means. My sister would receive nothing from me ever again until she held a full-time job for at least a year and apologized properly. The 6-month timeline was firm. It gave them time to get their house ready for sale, find a smaller place, and adjust their lifestyle. After 6 months, all payments stopped permanently. No extensions, no exceptions, no emergencies. Mom started crying again. Said I was forcing them out of their home. I reminded her that I'd been paying for their home. She wasn't being forced out. She was being asked to live in a home she could afford. Dad asked what would happen if they couldn't sell in 6 months. I told him that was what real estate agents and realistic pricing were for. They took the proposal with them. Said they needed to discuss it. I told them they had 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer expired and they were on their own permanently. Update 2. They accepted. Didn't take 48 hours. They called me that same night and agreed to everything. The desperation in Dad's voice was something I'll never forget. Not satisfying like I thought it might be. Just sad. I restored the half mortgage payment and Dad's medication coverage. The difference in my bank account was immediate and shocking. I was keeping an extra $2,000 a month. Money that was mine, that I could save, invest, or spend on myself. I'd forgotten what that felt like. My sister has been the most resistant to this new reality. She's bounced between rage and manipulation. First, she tried telling me I was abandoning her, that she needed me, that she'd always looked up to me. When that didn't work, she spread her version of events to extended family. Suddenly, I was getting calls from aunts and cousins telling me I was being too harsh, that family takes care of family, that I was lucky to be in a position to help. I sent them all the same response. A simplified version of my spreadsheet showing 8 years and $347,000. Then I asked each of them how much they'd contributed to my parents' and sister's lifestyle. The call stopped pretty quickly after that. Mom and Dad listed their house within 3 weeks. They priced it aggressively because they needed to sell fast. It hurt them, I could tell, packing up the house they'd lived in for 15 years. The house I'd been paying for while living in my cramped apartment. I helped them move because I'm not cruel, just done being used. The new place is a 2-bedroom condo, half the size, but actually within their budget. My sister had to return her SUV. The repossession was avoided only because I agreed to help her sell it privately on the condition that she bought a used car she could afford outright. She fought me on this for weeks before reality set in. She's now driving a 10-year-old sedan and working a full-time position at a call center. She hates every minute of it, based on her social media posts, but she's finally supporting herself. The most unexpected thing has been the shift in family dynamics. My parents are almost frightened of me now. They're overly polite, constantly worried about overstepping. They never ask me for anything, even when I can tell they're struggling with something. It's uncomfortable in a different way. I didn't want fear. I just wanted equity. Last week, Dad called me just to talk. Not about money, not asking for anything. He told me about a book he was reading. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. At the end, his voice got quiet and he thanked me. Not for the years of money, but for forcing them to face their reality. He said something about how they'd lost themselves in comfort, stopped being self-sufficient, and I'd given them a chance to remember who they were before they became dependent. I didn't know what to say to that. Still don't. Mom sent me a text a few days later saying something similar. That downsizing had been hard, but freeing. That they were cooking at home more, finding free entertainment, reconnecting with each other. She said she was sorry for losing sight of me as a person and only seeing me as a solution to their problems. My sister hasn't apologized properly yet. I don't expect she will anytime soon. But she did send me a screenshot of her first full paycheck with a caption that just said, "I get it now." It's not an apology, but it's acknowledgement. That's something. The 6-month deadline is approaching. 3 more weeks, and all my payments stop forever. My parents seem prepared. They've been sending me their budget updates monthly like I required, and the numbers work. They're living within their means, building a small emergency fund, even talking about picking up a few more bookkeeping clients for Mom. I've been thinking about what happens after the deadline. Part of me wants to maintain some distance, protect myself from falling back into old patterns. Another part misses the family I thought we were before money poisoned everything. Maybe we can find something in between. Maybe we can rebuild as equals instead of as dependents and benefactor. I've also been thinking about myself. For 8 years, I defined my worth by how much I could give. I measured my value as a son and brother by my bank balance. Therapy has helped me see how damaging that was. I wasn't being generous. I was being a martyr. And martyrs don't have healthy relationships. They have transactions disguised as love. My company stabilized. The layoffs ended without touching me again, and I even got a promotion with a significant raise. The irony isn't lost on me. Now that I could afford to help even more, I'm helping less. But the raise is going into investments, retirement accounts, and savings. I'm building the future I sacrificed for years. I'm planning a trip to Japan next spring, something I've wanted to do since college but never could afford while funding everyone else's lives. Standing here now, looking back at where this started, I don't regret cutting them off. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that 8 years of quiet resentment built to one explosive break instead of us having honest conversations along the way. But I don't regret enforcing boundaries. I don't regret choosing myself. The heavy silence I felt when they showed up crying has transformed into something else. It's still quiet, but it's peaceful now. It's the sound of my own life, lived for myself, with relationships based on love instead of obligation. That's worth more than $347,000 could ever buy.